Uh, so now we're back in 1988, and this is maybe a month or so after the other article comes out. That first one by Joseph McBride appeared in the Nation magazine. They played it big, ignored. A man writing for the San Francisco Examiner, a mainstream daily newspaper, writes an article where he found another memo, and this is 6 weeks after the Nation article. It begins like this. The headline is Documents. Bush blew whistle on rival in JFK slaying. Wow, you certainly want to read that article. The article begins like this. A man who identified himself as George H.W. Bush phoned the FBI in Houston a few hours after President John F. Kennedy's assassination in Dallas to report that a right-wing young Republican had, quote, been talking of killing the president, FBI documents show. Anyway, I go on then to have one full chapter in Family of Secrets where I study the name of the man in the document, and in Bush's call, he says, I'm an oil man and private citizen, and of course the other memo from the next day has him being a CIA officer getting briefings about Cubans. And I think, well, you can't be both and also be the third person who doesn't remember where he was at all that day. So here I study this man who he says he doesn't know much about, he really doesn't know anything about it, but he's heard that maybe this man was threatening. It's a kind of a strange call because he doesn't have any particulars. The man he's reporting lives in Houston. The shooting is in Dallas. This is after it's over. It's too late to sort of stop it from happening. If he knew that this man had been threatening, why didn't he call before? And so I look at this. First of all, he's making a phone call from a town that's very close to Dallas, and he makes a point of saying, I'm in Tyler, Texas. That is, I'm not in Dallas when I'm calling. And it wasn't several hours after. It was right at the moment that they were announcing Kennedy's death. The man he mentions, he didn't bother to mention that actually he was employing that man. That man was basically working as a sign painter in his Harris County Republican headquarters. He also didn't bother to mention, as I discovered, that at the very moment that he was calling the FBI saying this man might be a threat to the president's life, Bush's own assistant was at the man's house asking him if he could paint some signs. And thereby, when the Secret Service had to have this guy come in, there was his alibi. That, I was at the guy's house and he didn't cause any problem. I said, well, this is very strange. Something is going on here, and whatever it is, it reminds me of a good John le Carré novel. Deep stuff, the kind of things that only people who spend full time trying to create multi-layered realities would even attempt. Anyway, what I do in Family of Secrets is I go back from there and I trace George H.W. Bush's professional history, even his first jobs, and they all appear to be intelligence related. And I even catch up with one of his early business partners, and I ask him point blank, and he says, have you been cleared by the family? And I said, well, journalist, I don't think you really have to get cleared by anybody to just inquire into things of public interest. And he said, well, I'll have to call the old man and get back to you. I've got this all on tape. And he called the old man, that's Poppy, and then he called me back and he said not to talk to you, that you're crazy. So that was the end of that. There's also a section in the Kennedy, the reason I'm dwelling on the Kennedy matter, and you might say, well, I thought you were going to talk about George W., but this is about George W. This is about the larger construct behind people favored by certain elements within the establishment, if you will, who end up being president and end up getting reelected. And so there's a third element, and that is that I discovered that Lee Harvey Oswald had a man in his life who, in the year before the assassination, was sort of almost kind of like his favorite uncle. He was driving him around to, dentist appointments and getting him apartments and jobs. And I thought, well, and I looked at all these books, and the man's mentioned a little bit, but only a little bit. And nobody focused on, isn't it interesting that there was this man, if Oswald did it, wouldn't you look at the man? And I went to look at the Warren Commission hearings, and there were very long interviews with this man, but every time he says anything meaningful that he knows, powerful oilmen and so on, they go, oh, well, let's move on now. Now, you've got a nice tan. How'd you get your tan? And I'm thinking that is really, really a strange way to investigate somebody. So what I discover is that this man, a fellow by the name of George de Mohrenschildt, is a white Russian emigre, staunchly anti-communist, owned connections with intelligence services, and also a longtime friend of Poppy Bush. Say, well, that's interesting. Now you got Oswald's manager as a friend of Poppy Bush, and you got those 2 memos, and you got the Tyler call, and he can't remember where he was. I would think this is at least worthy of a little bit of discussion. Moving forward, the next thing about Poppy Bush that I discovered interesting was his rapid rise. And that was principally due to sponsorship by Richard Nixon. And I could not figure out why Nixon kept promoting him, because even on one of the Nixon tapes, you hear them sort of disparaging Poppy Bush as a kind of a lightweight, inconsequential. And yet Nixon, without explaining to his aides why he does it, always says, let's put Bush in there, he's loyal. Well, what I found, again, startled me, because I'd never really paid that much attention to the Nixon story and to Watergate, because it seemed to me, well, we know Nixon's the bad guy, he was out of control, and he was rightfully forced out of office. But again, when I began looking at this, focusing on Poppy Bush, I call him the anti-Zelig. If you remember the movie Zelig, he's always in the picture. Poppy Bush is a guy who should be in the picture and never is. And so I began trying to understand why Nixon favored Poppy Bush. And what I discovered, and there's a chapter on this in Family of Secrets, is that there was a back history between the Bush family, between George W.'s grandfather and Richard Nixon, all the way back to the 1940s. It appears that Richard Nixon was basically created from the beginning as a politician by a group of investment bankers headed by Prescott Bush. And this is in no history books. And that sort of explains why Richard Nixon, without even wanting to explain himself to his aides, felt compelled to keep, at least appearing to be giving the Bush family all of these favors. And then what happens is 1968, Nixon is becoming president, and I quoted these letters in here from all of these big corporations pressing Nixon to put Poppy Bush on as his vice president. Well, the man had just been a freshman congressman. I mean, really, that would really be a stretch. At least a freshman U.S. senator, but I mean a freshman member of the House of Representatives, and it was just extraordinary that these powerful companies would be pushing for him. And I was intrigued by that. But Nixon didn't do it. Nixon took Spiro Agnew instead. And then a little later, we start seeing all of these problems surrounding Richard Nixon. And what I get into in Family of Secrets is how Watergate turns out to be different than we understand it.